Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another dungeon guide for instances within the world of Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn. Today we are looking at the level 29 to 31 dungeon, Haukke Manor, situated within the Central Shroud near the White Wolf Gate of Gridania, or that of Bent Branch Meadows, whichever you prefer, which is nearby. This particular dungeon requires that you be on the level 28 story quest, Skeletons in Her Closet, and is part of the main story progression. That is how you will unlock it. So without further ado, we're going to look at the bosses with a brief look at some of the trash, but a majority of the trash within here is pretty much the same, so we only need to have a quick look at that, and then we'll go straight on to the bosses. As previously stated, the majority of the trash is identical, but in that they have slightly different names. The first few mobs you'll be encountering are Carpet Stains, the Maidservants, and the Attic Bats. The Maidservants do the most damage out of all of these targets, so our group specifically target those down first. With the Attic Bat having some pretty annoying ranged abilities, it's best to tank everything else on that, so pull onto the bat and kill everything else, because the rest will come to that location, whereas the bats can sometimes just stay at ranged. The other trash pretty much consists of those maidservants in smaller packs. The maidservants are always the high priority target because they indeed do the most damage. It's always best to get them out as fast as possible. The particular pack you will find the most difficult will be this particular pack here around the corner. From the first couple of rooms, in fact. This is quite a tricky pull. There is a pat here of another maidservant. If you do end up pulling this, you are going to probably end up using either a limit break to stay alive, or your healer will have to use entirely all of her mana to be able to keep everybody up. Either way you do this, you can recover from it, but lesser groups will find this particularly difficult. The rest of the packs are essentially much smaller than this, and this is the only real occasion where you may have some problems, but there are obviously patrolling mobs later on, which you need to be aware of, and obviously take one step at a time for each room. Other than that, the trash is fairly self-explanatory, so let's move on to the actual bosses. So the first boss you will face, it's the Manor Clavager. Now the Manor Clavager is a larger version of the Manor Maidservants, only she has a few extra tricks up her sleeve being a boss. But they're not much to worry about really. All the party needs to make sure they do is keep their faces to the back of the boss, because she has a horrible frontal cleave, which is a cone-based cleave attack, which will target the person with the highest enmity, which is hopefully your tank in this case, if your tank's any good. And for this very particular reason, the tank needs to face the boss away from you. Apart from that, there are two other abilities she has. There's a Dark Mist ability. Now this ability is indeed interruptible, and this is the first boss where you'll be focusing on interrupting and getting used to interrupting, but certainly will not be the last. Only this one will not kill the party if you don't interrupt it. However, it is best to learn now rather than later in the game when it will one-shot somebody. So Dark Mist is a massive AoE. It is, you can stun the Clavager to stop this, or you can use an interrupt if your class has one. If it does go off, it is minor damage, but it is rather significant. Your particular healer, if you have a White Mage or a Conjurer, they're going to have to use Medica to heal you up, because it's quite a lot of damage. Make sure people are topped off before this if you see it being cast. The last ability that she has is Void Fire 2, which is a targeted AoE. This is basically a red circle will be placed on a random person in a room. She will face them for a few seconds to put this on them. Simply move out a red circle, or you will take a pretty nasty Void Fire to the person who is in the actual hole. Fortunately, this particular AoE that's targeted doesn't have a dot, so you'll be fine. Even if you do get hit, just heal them up and carry on. Apart from that, that's the first boss in a nutshell, and you should have no further problems. So let's move on to the second boss, shall we? So, off the previous boss's corpse, you'll find a key. This is a key to the Ivy Door. If you turn around and go back out the same way you came in to fight the Clavager, you'll find the Ivy Door straight ahead. Unlock this and go downstairs into the basement, where you will find a series of rooms containing lots of monsters. Of course, some of these rooms are optional and require certain tiny keys to open them, which can be acquired from other rooms earlier in the dungeon. This is completely optional, but does reward extra experience from killing the monsters, and of course there are loot opportunities in the chest possible, so that is entirely up to you to decide whether or not your group wants to do that. If not, cut your way through and go clockwise, and make sure sure you go to the last room just before the barricade and you will find a key on the floor. This key will open the center room. Once you have gone through this center room door, you will meet the Manor Jester and Manor Steward, which is the second boss of this particular instance. Now this fight can be particularly difficult if your party likes to tab target. If people are DPS whores, you are likely going to die. So what do we do? Well, the two bosses have different abilities. The Manor Jester is a ranged attacker with ice-based abilities, and the Manor Steward is a melee attacker with a large AoE ability, much like the Dark Mist of the Claviger. So what we want to do is we want to focus down the Imp, the Manor Jester first. Get rid of the ranged ability target first. Completely focus this target. There's no point in having split DPS here. There's no reason for them to be killed at the same time. Just focus down the Jester and get him out of the way, because obviously this is the most annoying to try and keep aggro on if, you know, obviously this isn't a target. If someone gets targeted by this, they're going to get insta-bolted and probably die if you focus down the other one first. So it's best to focus on the one that cannot move and the one that's harder to tank. So once this boss is dead, you want to move on to the Manor Steward, who is the melee attacker with that Soul Drain AoE which I talked about. This is a large AoE, much like the Dark Mist of the Claviger, and essentially does the same ability, large AoE damage, which can be interrupted. So again, this is the second boss you will find basically telling you and teaching you how to interrupt, and that you can interrupt boss abilities, so make sure you get on that as soon as possible. Apart from that, the bosses aren't particularly difficult. It's more of a test of coordination and interrupts. Once you have done that, you need to head back upstairs. Now if you go back to the foyer where you first entered the dungeon, when you first ported in, you will notice that the stairs at the top there is a sealed barrier. Now you should be able to open that barrier, and there will be a mob, this Manor Sentry. Now my advice here with this particular piece of trash is to focus him down where he stands. If you end up pulling him down the stairs or to any other part of the manor, he can bug out and go evade status, which will actually break the entirety of the dungeon. It's a bit of a well-known bug at the moment, so just focus him down and kill him, or at least lower him to the certain percent of HP that's needed for him to go off and summon the final boss. Otherwise you will have a few issues and probably will not be able to complete the dungeon. Once he's dead, you'll have a nice little cutscene introducing the last boss to you. And that's Lady Amandine. Now, the overall strategy to defeat Lady Amandine is basically relying on people to have a brain, coordination, and indeed having your tank and healer know what they're doing. Now, the problem here is with the group I went with, our tank ditched us, and the problem with the Duty Finder currently is that people don't press the looking for group in progress button. So, unfortunately, we don't have a tank for this fight. But nevertheless, I said we will do it, and I took on the role of tank and healer at the same time on my level. I think I was level 30 as a conjurer, which is particularly tricky, as you can probably imagine. I hadn't unlocked a white mage at this point, so I was still a conjurer. But I'm going to show this fight in its entirety because I think it's fairly epic, and it's a show of what can be done even if you don't have a tank. So it is possible to tank this as a ranged. Obviously there are various abilities through the fight I'm going to look at, but the majority of the fight is essentially fighting the main boss, clicking an object, and then fighting lots of ads, killing the ads, and then killing the boss. That is it in a nutshell. Now, the clicking of objects I talked about are void lamps, so a certain percentage through the fight you will notice that void lamps will spawn in 4 points in the room, each corner of a room regardless, and what you need to do is have a player assigned to each of these and click them, otherwise they put out a horrible AoE damage void fire every 10 seconds. So obviously you want to get this out as fast as you possibly can and go back on the boss by simply going up to the lamp and clicking it, which I'm showing you here as I ended up having to do, which is very simple. Obviously we had one less person to do this, so we had to get other people to take both of those roles. Our DPS was lower as a result of that, and obviously we didn't have a tank, so the damage was higher. But once you've dealt with void lamps, this does happen multiple times through the fight, and you have to do this. I think on average we had 2 void lamp stages in our particular fight here, which was particularly annoying. The other ability is Dark Mist. If you remember that from the Claviger, it's the same ability essentially, which can be disrupted or stunned through to prevent this going off. It is a large AoE, and of course at this point with no tank we're having to heal through that as well if somebody doesn't have a stun or an interrupt, which I believe a lot of them do get off. The third ability is Void Fire 2, which is the targeted AoE, again off the Claviger, you may remember, where there's a red circle on the ground, and if you stand in it you're going to get exploded by fire. Obviously you don't want to stand in this, that's something else to avoid. The fourth ability is Lady's Candle, which are these bombs, these large elemental bombs, which will spawn as adds. At random times in the encounter, Lady Amandine will summon these bombs. You want to be careful because when they explode, if you're in the explosion radius, they can kill you and anyone nearby. It is pretty much a percentage-based explosion, so you can't cheese it very easily. So you definitely have to keep moving as well in this small room. Obviously the last ability is Last Hurrah, which is an AD wave. Now this is essentially where the boss gets really difficult, as this last ability, when she's low on HP, she will summon tons of adds. I mean literally tons of adds. This is at 25% health, remind you. So obviously you want to focus down these adds and be able to kill the boss. If you've got all of these adds in the room, you're not going to be able to kill it. Your healer, and indeed in my case I'm the tank and the healer, is going to have a tough time. So we focused down the adds as fast as we could and then went back on the boss. Apart from that, the boss is fairly easy, he says with a straight face. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. This was a real show of our combined effort, coordination and skill. And just to show you can do it without a tank. But regardless, hopefully this video has been of some use to you, the viewer. And indeed, I'm going to let you enjoy the rest of the fight here because it's quite enjoyable. But yeah, if you've liked this video, leave a like below, or give a recommendation in the comment section of what you would like to see next from Final Fantasy. I'm going to hopefully do all of the guides to all of the dungeons in the game, including some raid footage with my new guild, which is Lost Fate Mercenaries. There will be a link to that if you wish to apply there. We do have social members, PvPers, raiders, everything you can think of, and we are on the Ragnarok Legacy server EU, so be sure to come and join us if you wish to. My name has been Meoni, thank you for watching my video, and I will indeed see you next time.